Alright, picking up from where we left off last video, we're going to select our game object, and then we're going to add a component to it, VRC contact receiver. We're going to scale this receiver to the size of our game object, whatever that might be for you. We're going to go in and turn off allow others for interaction. You'll also want to turn on the local only tag, and then we're going to use a hand collision tag to interact with our receiver here. Then we're going to go in and we're going to put our object name plus grabbed for our parameter name and make sure that it's a constant receiver type. Next, we'll go back and select our bread container that we made last video and select bread holster. Then we're going to add component and we're going to turn off allowing others to interact with us. We'll set it to the scale that we want, and we're going to add a custom collision tag as well as set our bread holstered parameter. So here we're going to set up a custom collision tag that is bread holstered sender, and we're going to use this to send information to our receiver on our hip. So now we create the contact sender on our bread here. So we'll scale it to the same size as our receiver, and then we're going to add a custom collision tag to it that's going to have the same tag as the receiver that we just created with bread holster sender. Now we're going to go and create our animation for our world object. We're going to call this bread world so that we can drop our object in world space. We'll drag and drop this into our bread motion layer and our FX controller, and we'll create transitions to and from the hand layer and the holster state as well. You'll want to zero out everything in your transition. And then we're going to go and select our bread world animation. We'll go down and click record. We'll head up to our bread container, and we will set the bread holster weight to 0, bread hand weight to 1 and back to 0 so that it records, and toggle off our parent constraint. Then we'll want to go and add a second keyframe, hit the record button, and stop previewing. Now we're going to head up to our animator and click on parameters. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add 2 new bools. Name them the same thing that you used in the first and second receivers parameter to derive. In my case, I had bread grabbed and bread holstered, and then we're going to create 2 more bools, and we're going to call them the same thing but add net on the end of them. And we'll also want 1 more bool that is local. Now we're going to click on the transition between empty clip and bread holster. We're going to turn off has exit time and add our is local parameter to this and make sure that it is set to true. Then what we're going to do is go to our bread hand transition to bread world, and we're going to add 3 conditions to this. First one being bread toggle, make sure that's set to true. Our second is going to be gesture right equaling 2. And then our final transition condition will be bread holstered, and it will have to be false. This will allow us to drop our object in the world. For our transition from world to hand, we're going to add 2 conditions here. Bread toggle set to true, gesture right is equal to 1, and then we're also going to want to add in 1 more parameter that's going to be our bread grabbed, and that will also be true as well. This will allow us to determine if we're actually touching the bread when we do our gesture. For our transition from bread world to bread holster, we're going to just add 1 parameter here, and it's going to be our bread toggle, and whenever it's false, it will head to bread holstered, so when you turn off your bread, it'll go back to your hip. For our transition from bread holster to bread hand, we're just going to add 1 more condition and add in bread grabbed and make sure that's set to true so we know that we're grabbing the bread when we do this. And then for our transition from bread hand to bread holster, we're going to add in 1 more condition again. And we're just going to make sure this is set to bread holster and make sure that's true so that we know that we're dropping it in our holster whenever we release. We're also going to change our gesture right to equal 2. And this will just let us keep things lined up with our logic. We'll select everything, we'll press Ctrl D, duplicate it, and set it to the other side, create a transition from empty clip to holstered net, and then we're going to change it to where there's no exit time, and we're going to use our is local bool again, but we're going to make sure that it's set to false this time. Now what we're going to do is we're going to select our bread holster net to bread hand net transition, and we're going to get rid of gesture right, and we're just going to use our bread grabbed net parameter being set to true as our transition for these 2 animations here. And to go back, we'll get rid of gesture right And we'll change our bread toggle to bread holstered net and make sure that is set to true. This will allow us to transition back, but for remote players. Now for our transition from bread hand net to bread world net, we're going to only need 2 conditions. We'll be using bread grabbed net and we'll be using bread holstered net. And we want both of these to be set to false so that we can transition into world space for remote players properly. For our transition back to bread hand from bread world, we're going to use the same conditions we used in bread holstered net to bread hand net. We use bread grabbed net set to true. For our last steps in the animator, we're going to select our holster animation on the local side or right side here and click add behavior. Click on VRC avatar parameter driver and click add parameter twice. Change them to our grabbed and holstered net parameters in that order. And then since we're in the holster animation, we're going to make sure that the value for our holstered is set to true. We're going to do the same thing on hand. We'll add our 2 parameters here for our parameter driver. Grabbed net and holstered net, and since we're on our hand, we're going to set grabbed value to true. And then lastly, for bread world, we're going to add a VRC parameter driver again, add our 2 parameters, change them to bread grabbed net and bread holster net, and we want to leave these false. This will indicate that we're in world space now. Now for our last 2 steps, let's add our networked parameter to our expressions list and a toggle in the menu. Find your expressions list by clicking on your avatar's base and selecting the menu in your avatar's descriptor. We'll head over and we'll add 3 parameters. Make sure these are all bools, that they are defaulted to off, and that they're saved. We'll double click our bread toggle and copy paste that into our expressions list over here. And we'll do the same thing for bread grabbed net and bread holstered net. Next, what we'll do is we'll select our expressions menu. We'll click add control. We'll change this to our bread toggle. Make sure that your type is set to toggle. And then we want to use our bread toggle bool to turn our object on and off. Now that we've got everything set up, let's go hop in game and check it out. Hey, hopping in game here just to check out our bread toggle and our parent constraints. I'll go ahead and toggle on the bread here. And you can see it's on my hip, and if I do my right hand gesture, nothing happens, because we have to actually be touching the bread for it to come out. And so then we can drop it in a world space here as well by doing open hand and releasing it not on our hip. And I can pick it back up by doing my right fist gesture and putting it back in my hand, and then I can place it back on my hip here. So I hope that these 2 videos have been helpful for you guys, getting started with parent constraints and then incorporating the contact system into that. If you guys have any questions or concerns or anything like that, just drop them in the comments below, and I'll try to help you guys the best that I can. If you guys have any ideas or requests for new tutorials or anything of that sort, just let me know in the comments below as well, and I'll try to get to those. So I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you next time.